Okay, first of all, I would like to thank you, Mary Brown, and thank you, Ganesh, for your nice invitation to participate in this seminar. I have maybe to share my screen.
Yes,
This
please.
one. Is it okay?
Yes.
It's okay.
Perfect.
I have to go for, maybe in the beginning of the presentation, if it's possible. Sorry.
Yes.
So I'm sorry, I'm not so much familiar with this kind of Zoom. So we will have an overview of my presentation. Okay. Sorry.
Yeah. No, that's okay.
So okay. So as you said, Maribel, I'm quite moved because this is the first time I have to talk about the Central Anatolia and Kaletepe since our dear friend New passed away. So okay, for most of the scholars involved in Neolithic studies, Central Anatolia is a key place for dealing with Neolithic dispersal through the Mediterranean and Europe, and for understanding the modes of transmission and reconfiguring of the Neolithic paradigm through time and space. Okay. For most of the scholars involved in, for some researchers, as Offer by Joseph, for instance, Central Anatolia is not a primary formation zone for the Neolithic, but one of the areas which was colonized earliest from the northern Levant. And one of the major arguments is probably the co-presence of most of the cultivars in the northern Levant, which is not the case in Central Anatolia. For some other scholars, as Mehmet Zoran, for instance, the hypothesis that Central Anatolia is a primary formation zone is supported by the potential of proven presence of several domesticable species, even not the whole, and perhaps even more so by the specific traits that will find their full expression later at Çatalhöyük, whether it be architectural techniques, material culture, or symbolic systems and representations. In addition, the massive presence of obsidian, whose trade in the Neolithic Near East was noticed very early on, reinforced the idea that Central Anatolia played a leading role in the construction of the Neolithic paradigm. Following Colin Renfrew's pioneering research, the Cappadocian obsidian sources were identified as the earliest exploited and longest distant disseminated in the context of the pre-ceramic Neolithic of the Near East. Among the sources, the Goleda and Shiflik outcrops were very quickly identified as having had a major influence. This phenomenon of distant diffusion was very quickly felt to be disconnected from the demands of everyday life and to have a strong symbolic value. This observation contributed strongly to the identification of a vast sphere of interaction, assuming in the background the existence of a koine in the sense of Biosaf. A koine itself based on the sharing of the same ideology, the same cosmogony maybe, in the sense of Jacques Covin, and Acme would be situated during the PPNB period. However, for many years, this obsidian was perceived essentially as a raw material without any specific entropic signature, even if its preferential transfer in the form of lamellar product was generally indicated. Since the end of the 70s, Jacques Tixier, in the wake of the French school of Marcel Mauss and the ethnology of techniques, has promoted a new reading of artifact, which is now widely shared. These artifacts are observed as elements of a system resulting from preconceived idol schemes. These artifacts are linked one to each other, chronologically in terms of processes within a chaîne opératoire. The identification of naping techniques and methods and the implementation of the concepts of economy of débitage and economy of raw material, inter alia by Marie-Louise Inizan and Catherine Perles, have enabled an undeniable qualitative jump in lithic studies by making it possible to identify technical tradition as well as variabilities linked to the skills and knowledge of the authors. In Central Anatolia, the first excavations conducted in the early 90s at Kömürcü-Kaletepe by Ufukassin revealed the very strong link between the PPN site and the obsidian source of Cappadocia, mainly the Goluda, and secondarily the Nenesida, due to the production of hundreds of thousands of obsidian artifacts at this village. The studies that we have conducted in 1994 with Frédéric Arbès, Nobal Kanatlan, and Marc Larcovin on the most recent levels of the TEL showed that this gigantic production had been carried out in situ after the introduction of barely roughened precores. And of course, this observation opened up the problem of the social control of the sources. What was the role of the local populations in this control? What was their place within the organization of long-distance distribution and networks? These questions, stimulated by the discovery at the end of the 19th of traces of PPN napping activities in several sectors of Goluda and Nenesida by Marie-Claire, Noor, Abro de Aparamian, motivated the implementation of research, surveys, and excavation as close as possible to obsidian outcrops in order to try to characterize the modes of acquisition, the nature of the activities carried out, and correlatively, the nature of the item taken away, and further, if possible, the cultural identity of nappers. The research was conducted by Noor Balkan Atler and myself in the framework of a partnership between the French Mission of Anatolian Prehistory and the Department of Prehistory of Istanbul University. And this research focused more particularly on the Kömürcü area. The latter had been identified early on by Sebastian Payne, inter alia, as the hotspot due to the abundance and quality of obsidian outcrops. You can see these black things on the slide taken from the top of the Büyük Goluda. In this context of interdisciplinary research, cooperation with geomorphologists and geochemists from Meudon and Orléans, especially Catherine Kuzudjolu, Damas Morales, Bernard Gratius, this cooperation has enabled the geology and geochemical characteristic of the Goluda obsidian to be redefined. Otherwise, 4 field operations were carried out between 1998 and 2005. Kaletepe dairy-free upstream provided a remarkable paleolithic sequence from the Acheulean and Mousterian. Kaletepe Trench M revealed huge wastes related to bifacial roughing out and preforming from the early Neolithic period, which is for the moment poorly published, but with interesting connection with Çatalhöyük level 9-7 in the acceptance of Melot. Kaletepe dairy-free downstream showdown more than 5 meters thick wastes from laminar middle chalcolithic production dated by MS from the first half of the 5th millennium BC and covering few traces of late PPN activity. Last but not least, the excavation of Kaletepe Trench P have enabled us to identify and study important workshop deposits, mainly dated, as will be seen below, to the early PPNB period. Essentially, the stratigraphic sequence described by Damas Morales is made up of colloidal deposits containing some pumice, gravel, and rhyolite pebbles. And the series is affected after its deposition by scalloped ruby concretions. I can see in red there. They highlight concentration of oxides, possibly linked to pedological processes as part of the alteration processes of the volcanic glass contained in the sediment. The base of the sequence, layer 4, yields very rare, highly altered obsidian artifacts that could be linked maybe to the Mousterian deposit upstream. Stratigraphic cluster 3, which yield hundreds of thousands of obsidian artifacts, mainly concentrate in about 40 square meters reject area, is attributed, as we shall see, to the early PPNB. The very good preservation of the edge of the artifacts, the relative numerous refittings, if one considers the difficulties in implementing them, indicates that it is an in situ deposit. The disturbances resulting from bioturbation, from suslake and other more strange molds, mainly concern stratigraphic cluster 2, which is indeed softer. Cluster 2 provides dismantled stone structures and some artifacts that refer to advanced stage of the PPNB. All features that refer to the late aspect are found in these upper layers 1, 2, and on the surface. Several armatures with covering retouch from stratigraphic cluster 1 refer to the Mussola or to Janssen horizon, including a pond with an engraved pictogram, which is nice. The density of the remains is such that it was not possible to count all of the flakes, estimated at several 100,000 elements for a mass of several tons. Within the mass of remains, essentially composed of roughing and preforming flakes, chips, and debris, it was possible to isolate about 10,000 pieces that are characteristic of the full exploitation stage of the core. Platform obtaining tablets, crested blades, lateral blades, diverse central and lateral products and byproducts. This characteristic waste make it possible to clearly distinguish two chaînes opératoires dedicated to blade and bladelet productions. Okay, classical, though this is already published. You remember this kind of naviform bidirectional débitage dedicated to preferential points. And the second one is this production of prismatic bladelets removed by pressure from unidirectional cores. The naviform débitage are made from beneficial preforms, very carefully shaped, of which are very rare, a few examples abundant on the site. These preforms were opened by the interplay of two opposed crested blades, also very carefully prepared. The purpose of this débitage was to produce pointed blades with a very straight profile, about 20-25 millimeters wide and 12-15 centimeters long. There is no preferential striking platform for the production of these points, but an alternation that is allowed by the lateral tilt of the core and that create additional arises compared to the simplest point production scheme published by initially published by Frederick Abbès. And this Kaletepe modality, Kaletepe naviform mode, can be compared to the one proposed by Frederick Abbès later in 2008 for Murray Bed 3A, 3B. The straightness of longitudinal profile of the debitor surface is controlled by highly standardized apical and basal reduction, apical classical epsilon blades. This configuration requires a very high level of know-how, which, as far as I know, is not achieved by the best current experimenters. If we estimate the number of points produced for each core to be between 4 and 6, the 320 or so cores found in the naviform cores found in the layer would correspond to something like 1,300 to 1,900 points, which is out of all proportions to the 220 fragments found in the layer. On the other hand, the number of apical and basal reduction associated to the production of these points of the order of 1,200 seems to be more consistent. Thus, there is a massive carryover of the central points, maybe around 85%. Unidirectional pressure debitage is dedicated to the production of highly standardized bladelets. Their dimensions are about 12.5 millimeters wide with a very low standard deviation, and based on the dimensions of the cores, about 9 to 10 centimeters long. These blanks are detached with a regular rhythm of 3 central bladelets for 2 lateral ones, allowing the preferential production of blanks with trapezoidal section. The dimensions of the pressure opening tablets and several refittings made it possible to estimate the total number of bladelets obtained for each of the 126 core at about 80, which leads to a general estimate of about 10,000 bladelets for the parts of the workshop we have excavated. If we consider the about 2,500 fragments of central and lateral pressure bladelets found in the workshop, which is strongly overestimated because of their great fragmentation, we can estimate that at least 75% of the production was taken away. Most of the central products with a trapezoidal cross-section, nearly 80%, but also a significant part, about 40% of the lateral bladelets. Few after the excavations, we were able to carry out 2 preliminary AMS dates on charcoal for this workshop P. These dates already suggested a great age for the workshop in relation to what was known at that time about the beginning of the Neolithic in Central Anatolia and notably at Ashekla. However, there are very large standard deviation in the order of 90 years did not allow us to formally conclude, and 2 dates were not enough anyway. Recently, thanks to Alexia Dequet, we were able to return to microchecal samples that were taken during the excavation and exported to France thanks to the support of the Turkish authorities. Alexia Dequet was thus able to select 9 samples that were aligned in the stratigraphy and that allowed us to date the functioning of the workshop by AMS. So the 3.2 assemblage, which contains the naviform and prismatic waste, is well located in stratigraphy below the level 3.1, connected to a small level of remains, and above another indurated horizon 3.3. For context, for 3.2 level 3.2, 2 different contexts were dated. A napping area here, characterized by a very high density of micro remains, where we found 5 datable samples available, and the waste area here, and where we were able to find 2 available samples. All these samples were talk about availability, the availability of the sample. I mean that the sample corresponds to plants with a rather short lifespan, and all the detail will be given by Alexia in the forthcoming publication. And the upper horizon 3.1, which constitutes a terminus antequem for the workshop, could be dated twice but unfortunately from vitrified piece of charcoal, which are not specifically determined. Thanks to the good stratigraphic positioning and the intrinsic quality of the samples, we were able to build a Bayesian chronological model using for that the chronomodel software, which is very interesting and very archaeologic friendly, because all the construction is very close to what we used to do in the field as matrix, Aris matrix, and so on. So it's a very interesting and software, and I recommend particularly. In this software, the constraints, the a priori, are established on the event scene and based solely on the stratigraphic overlays observed in the field. Those events are then inserted into clusters on the phase scene without any a priori. The phases are described by taking into consideration, primo, the a posteriori modes of beginning and end of the phase, and secondo, the activity curves which correspond to the sum of the a posteriori distribution of the events in the phase. A first Bayesian model indicates that workshop P is located between 8,690 and 8,280 BC, with a terminus antequem given by the layer 3.1 starting around 8,280. It is noted, however, that one of the three dates from B26 context aligns clearly with the 3.1 horizon and may correspond to the top of the cluster 3. And if we exclude this divergent date in order to build a new model, number 3, the different dated contexts of the workshop are placed between 8,690 still and 8,360 BC. And the activity curves for the napping places here down, and for the reject area here in the middle are almost identical. So the model is very consistent. In the last 10 years, then Central Anatolia had the benefit of very important advances in the knowledge of epipaleolithic and preceramic Neolithic contexts, especially with the extension of excavation studies at Aşıklı, Pınarbaşı, and Banjuklu. At Aşıklı, a set of new dates were recently published in the last monograph directed by Mirban, Steiner, and Güneş. And using this recent dates were done using as much as possible material with reduced longevity, which is what we shall do. Their modeling indicates the start of the tell around 8,400 BC in trench 4GH and around 8,260 BC in trench 2GK. The latter chronology would be reinforced by dates of around 8,300 given for level 5 in the sector in the zone 4GH in the recent publication. And maybe Mirban could tell us if this has been confirmed or not, because of course for a terminus postcrem for the tail, this level 5 is very important. At Pınarbaşı, Trench A, the modeling places the epipaleolithic phase 1 between 9090 and 8560, and phase 2 still devoid of traces of agriculture between 8280 and 7670. This phasing indicates clearly that the beginnings of the Kaletepe workshop, few after 8700, are at least 2 or even 3 centuries before the beginning of the Neolithic at Ashekle Trench 4, GH level 4. For Bonjoklu, the published date for the earliest Neolithic context, HPQ, directly dated on a serial grain, is between 8,430 and 8,240. It's not enough for allowing precise timing of the beginning of the settlement, but it is likely that the development of this site coincides with phase 4 and 3 of Ashekle, I guess. The activity curves, very useful in this case, which correspond to the a posteriori sum probabilities, are particularly demonstrative in this sense, as you can see. In other words, it's now very clear to me that, primo, the earliest phase of Neolithic exploitation at Kaletepe predates the first evidence of agricultural village settlements in Central Anatolia at Ashekle and Bonjoklu. And secondo, it parallels the late aspect of the epipaleolithic at Pınarbaşı. So let's now turn to the Levant and more particularly to the Middle Euphrates, and focusing especially on Jade. In the Levant, in the northern Levant, here we observe that the exploitation phase of Kaletepe is quite precisely aligned first with the horizon of Jade phase 2, which is itself aligned with the transitional phase of Jeffel Armar, where, however, unfortunately, only one date is available. And secondo, with the horizon of Jade phase 3, which itself is aligned, for instance, with very well contextualized occupations of the early PPNB in Kahasa, for instance. These horizons correspond to the so-called transitional stage and to the early PPNB in its classical acceptance. The transitional phase may correspond in large part to the Murebatian, which is very poorly dated on the eponymous sites, but a modeling based on the few dates with acceptable resolution could place phase 3B and 3A between 8,800 and 8,600 BC. This chronological context sheds light on several fundamental points concerning the origin and cultural identity of Kaletepe. The very well constructed and regular naviform cores are clearly related to those of the eponymous Murebatian and the Jerf El Armar transitional stage. This is also perfectly consistent with the appearance of early bidirectional cores and points also at Jade phase 2. Such relationship is supported by the presence at Murebate 3 of several Cappadocian obsidian elements, coming from bidirectional debitage and potentially compatible with the production of regular points on naviform cores. On the other hand, looking to the production of pressure bloodlets, this production is not at all established in the middle apparatus during the early PPNB periods. And the question of the origin of the Kaletepe pressure making invites to turn to the Mesopotamian high valleys, and in particular the Chayanu sequence. At Chayanu, this technical tradition is very well established at least from the channel building phase, but the absolute chronology of this site is not well known if one only considers the available radiocarbon dates produced several decades ago. So maybe there are new dates linked to, thanks to the new excavation, but I don't know. In the covered paved building phase, and above all in the cell building phase, the use of obsidian in Chayanu for pressure napping increases. However, the operational scheme change according to a mode that is no longer conical or semi-conical, I mean, more or less similar to bullet cores, but the new mode is a frontal mode with a flat platform that is generally inclined. And this change is associated with a significant widening of the module of the bladelets. So this new way, which appears very late in Chayanu, could show some similarities with Kaletepe, but it's very difficult to make a chronological connection between the two sites. Comparable practices, comparable way to produce obsidian bladelets starting from a flat inclined platform is also attested at Jaffa-Yuk, but here also it is difficult to set this in absolute chronology. Looking southwards, in the chronological arc of the early PPNB, pressure debitage is present only in the form of finished obsidian products, mainly central, more exceptionally lateral bladelets. The best context to appreciate this phenomenon are primo Jade, again, where this element appear mainly in phase 3, and secondo Shiro-Rocambos, where they are present as early as early phase A. At Klimonas, in Central Anatolian obsidians are barely represented with only one well-contextualized but rather anonymous flake at the base of building number 1. So it is clear that the diffusion and the connection between is not of the same, same sense and not the same intensity during the earliest phase of PPN in Cyprus. At Shiro-Rocambos, geochemical analysis have clearly shown that at the beginning of the early phase, obsidian imports were at the expense of the Kaletepe outcrops, which were exploited in Workshop P. In contrast, at the end of this phase, these are the Kaiola sources that were mainly exploited, the same that were massively exploited at Tashekla. So we have to wonder if this data could help us to give a terminus antiquem around 8,240 or 30 for the functioning of the Kaletepe PPNB workshop. Anyway, there seems to have a chronological concordance in the successive exploitation of these outcrops, both from a local and from an external perspective. And this is something we have to think about. The best documented industry in Central Anatolia, for instance, is that of Ashiklu. But this industry has extremely different characteristics from those of Kaletepe. There are indeed bidirectional débitage, but they are usually exploited in an unidirectional mode with very little care taken. And here, the opposite striking platform essentially serves to correct the longitudinal convexity in order to obtain blades with a more or less straight profile. These characteristics of the archaeological débitage are present as early as in the level 4. The resulting blanks are very irregular, and the shaping of tools, particularly the points, requires a very important recourse to retouching. This conception of tool making, where retouching compensates for a lack of predetermination and standardization of blanks, is very different from that of Kaletepe and the level 4 mode in general, where the morphology of supports is largely predetermined by pre-core geometry and débitage process. There is no trace within the archaeological industry of prismatic blades evoking in situ pressure production, no trace at all. The only element that, to my knowledge, would point in this direction is a blade from level 4, figured by Laurence Astruc in the recent monograph of the site. If the diagnosis was confirmed, it would be evidence of contact at a fairly late stage, in the period the Kaletepe or the PPNB workshop was still operating. Another very important component of the archaeological toolkit is the abundance of geometric microliths throughout the sequence. At least in level 4, these projectiles are shaped by the microburn technique, probably in the successive phase also. And in this level, the microlithism seems to be strongly affirmed. Very small triangles and scalene bladelets. This microlithism refers unequivocally to the Mediterranean epipaleolithic tradition, for example, at Eukuzini. It is also a characteristic of the Penobscot industries in the Konya Plain. This microlithic tradition will survive throughout the PPN in Central Anatolia, not only in Nashikla, but also in Banjiklu, where there's also a strong component of the industry, and again in Çatalhöyük in Melat area pre-level 12, potentially until the beginning of the 7th millennium BC. And this has nothing to do with the PPN Near Eastern traditions. Now, Kaletepe thus presents a first technical tradition very clearly oriented towards the formative stage of the PPNB in the Middle Euphrates, where the naviform method certainly found their origins. A second component is oriented towards the Mesopotamian high valleys and beyond to the Zagros, the Caspian, and Central Asia, where the pressure methods originated. However, the chronological framework of these later interactions has not been clearly established. We need too much the radiocarbon dates and periodization are missing in this region for understanding the links. On the other hand, the connections, if the connections from between these workshops of Cappadocia and Northern Levant and Upper Mesopotamia are well established, the interaction on at a local scale are invisible, absolutely invisible. So during the 9th millennium, Central Anatolia witnessed the coexistence of several socio-cultural components, one in the tradition of the epipaleolithic hunter-gatherers, who had long been established in this region, The others linked to the first agricultural communities of the Near East and maybe different communities in the Near East. Contrary to the mainstream thinking, it is very unlikely, in my opinion, that a purely economic logic, in this case, the search for arable land under demographic pressure, was the main driving force behind the diffusion of the Neolithic. I think these first Neolithic impacts are mainly motivated by strategies which are specific to Neolithic craftsmen, engaged in a process of control of the mineral world, as farmers were engaged for the control of biological resource. This research of exploitation and exploitation of material, which with a high sign value, was probably embedded within social relationships and probably played a great role in the identification and reproduction of elites. In such a context, mobility of craftsmen could have been extremely discrete, limited to rare periods favorable to the exploitation of resources which are situated at an altitude of about 100 meters, and that were probably inaccessible for a large part of the year due to the snow. This coexistence has allowed for interactions of very varying magnitude, generally at low level. The contrasting situation with regards to the agropastoral practices presented by Ashikli and Banjuklu on the one hand and Penobasher on the other support the idea of diversified response or no response to this external stimuli. In conclusion, I would suggest that the originality of the Central Anatolian Neolithic is therefore probably not the result of an autonomous innovation process, but more likely of the integration of Levantine and Mesopotamian Neolithic components into a very vivid Mesolithic technocomplex. So thank you for your attention, and I will be happy to answer your questions. And I would apologize for my English, which is so chelebele, comme ci, comme ça. Thank you.
Thank you, Didier. I remember this day because I took that photograph.
You took the photograph? Yeah.
Could you please turn off your share screen?
Can stop this, sharing this? Okay.
So thank you again. It's really important for especially the people who work in Central Anatolia for understanding the Neolithization process. There are several different ideas since Çatal excavated, and then Ashikli, and then Kaletepe, and we try to understand that puzzle or enigmatic story. Especially, I think the key point is you highlighted an invisibility of Central Anatolian Neolithic people, Kaletepe-based network long distance network. It's very important to solve Neolithization or understand Neolithization of Central Anatolia. I think there must be several questions. Okay, Eleni, please.
Hello, Didier.
Hello, Eleni.
You will get your first question from an archaeobotanist, ostensibly, but it has nothing to do with plants or lithics, sensu stricto. I found your last sentence, the very last sentence you used in your presentation, extremely intellectually stimulating. So I would like to invite you to unpack it a little bit. you spoke about Central Anatolia as the meeting place of, correct me if I got this wrong, of the Levantine and the Mesopotamian traditions, expressed locally as in the context of a Mesolithic techno-complex. And I'm struggling a little bit to imagine or to translate that into a process of neolithization that would not be autonomous, but at the same time distinct. What is the Mesolithic techno-complex that could have acted as the, you know, the connecting tissue of these different traditions? How do you imagine that? If you want, I'm actually inviting you to add a couple more sentences to the end of your presentation to tell us, how do you imagine this, or where do you think it's taking the interpretation of your data?
I think the knowledge about the epipaleolithic in Anatolia in general is very low, but if I remember well, there are several sites connected to the Mediterranean, maybe Belbedi, Belbasha, and all the sites close to also to Okuzini and this part, where the Mesolithic epipaleolithic tradition is quite strong, with similar characteristic of producing macroliths using the micron techniques, where you're producing small bladelets, and this is a part of probably a huge techno-complex which spread, maybe derivating from the Natufian and the No, because Natufian is very early, of course, is earlier, and also in the Aegean you can find some epipaleolithic. So there is a tissue of there is a network of Mesolithic epipaleolithic population. That's good. If I remember well, most of the a part of the industry described by Douglas in Pınar and also I think in Banjuku, part of the industry is made of obsidian coming from the same resources, the same outcrops that were used by the Levantine into brackets experts, moving experts, pioneers. So there is a place for confrontation. There is a place for exchange. There's different situations that can allow the meeting of people, but also indirect exchange. And when I went for the sole time I went in Châteaulieu, I was invited there, and I was invited also by Stringy Carter, and we had a look on several parts of this industry. And I was surprised to see that next to the local production of this bifacial preformed, and which are also probably both tools and cores, there were series of upsilon blades. And these upsilon blades, which are byproducts of naviform production, have nothing to do in this context. They are selected pieces, probably taken on the wastes of the Neolithic and brought back by the long time later. So maybe you can perfectly imagine, in general terms, that the Mesolithic had knowledge of what was done in these outcrops in this Neolithic workshop, and maybe And when you look at the industry of archaeological, it seems that the whip for producing blades is something like an imitation, but with a low skill, low level of knowledge, an imitation of the processes led by the Neolithic people. So this is one. Maybe there's a field for mating. There's a place for mating. And at the moment, probably this process increases. But in my opinion, the very first interaction are at low level, almost invisible, and with very small touch, very small intensity. I don't know if my reply was okay. I'm not sure.
Oh, you did. Thank you.
Okay, Douglas first, and Ian, if it's possible. Ian.
Okay, Ian. Okay. If you want me to comment more on some of what you said about Bunjok and Punabasha, you can feel free to ask, since we're here together, which is really nice. But I actually, since Eleni didn't ask you about plants, I'm not going to ask you about lithics. What I was slightly interested in, because you didn't quite mention it, is okay, obviously, in the Kaletepe trenches you excavated, the people there were clearly quite busy napping. But do you have any evidence for other activities? I mean, any evidence for food consumption, or given we're presumably looking at, reasonable periods of activity in that location, they had to eat something, they had to process food. So, I think there are interesting questions about if there is any evidence, what that might indicate about interactions with local environments and obviously potentially then local people. But I obviously don't know if you have any evidence that might point to any of that.
Unfortunately, there's almost nothing else than napping. We have very few tools, formal tools, very few, maybe something like 1 or 2 arreds among 10,000 characteristic pieces. That's all. And we try to run microanalysis on a few blanks that were that seem to have been used, and with also formal retouch, but they are very brief uses and with no decisive results. So the point is that maybe there were a tent or something, an habitation just close to the workshop, but we didn't find. So we have no traces, only traces of napping activities.
And I guess I can't help ask at least something about lithics. I guess you don't have any evidence of flint or chert tools in those workshops at all. I mean, it's pretty rare generally in Central Anatolia, but still.
One interesting point is that from this workshop, of course, the people exploited the Kaletepe source, Kaletepe outcrop, of course, but they make also some expedition in Kayol side, on the other side, and they napped, if I remember well, 2 cores there, which are partially present, and 1 or 2 cores from Nenezi. So from this workshop, they had some expedition and some recognizing maybe the potential outcrops all around. But so they are not only focused on this small area, but probably they exploited a larger territory. But nothing, we have nothing to say about hunting activities or gathering, of course, nothing.
Thanks, Didier.
Okay, please, Ian.
Didier, great to see you. So I want to ask you a question that's more along the lines of if we were at a restaurant drinking red wine and having seafood, and less along the lines of specific data. And that is that I'm a flint knapper. As somebody who years ago started making bifaces and hand axes in the Near East. And I teach students how to do this, and I do it and I enjoy it. And I have read a lot of your literature, a lot of work dealing with naviform and the production systems. And I'm relatively good with my hands, and it's beyond me to go into the world of physically making naviform, sort of Kaletepe, you know, as we all wish to be the Kaletepe naviform production people in some form. And as you were talking, I kept coming back and listening to your terms, which I agree with, where you were talking about craftspeople, and that this is essentially the slippage point in all of this is between that of exchange of goods versus exchange of knowledge. And the part that I kept coming back to that I don't understand, and it's probably not a fair question to ask you, but the part that I still wrestle with is the whole aspect of intergenerational learning and how complicated it is to teach people. If you have a master craftsperson who can do this kind of work, how complicated is it to teach junior people who can make Paleolithic bifaces? How complicated is it as a task? You know, so if we think of it as, you know, if there's craftspeople, is it a matter that it takes somebody 6 months to understand how to do this, but then it takes them 2 or 3 more years to get to a point where they can reliably do this? I know it's not a fair question, and this is why you should have red wine with this, but can you help me understand a little bit of the kind of complexity to this?
Maybe I can give you some highlights about this story, because if you remember, we have 320 naviform cores. These naviform cores are sometimes imperfect. Perfect. I mean, with no posterior transformation, and among these very well preserved naviform cores, with Jacques Pellegrin, we were able to make a distinction between different degrees of expertise. Of course, this is through the filter of a modern flint knapper. But it is obvious that there are different degrees of care for preparation of the corniche, of the débitage, the points of percussion, preparation of the crests, and the way the blanks were extracted. So we have several categories. This is one element of response. I mean, there are probably in the among the team of nappers that went there, differences in expertise and skills. Second point is that we can observe posterior damage on the cores, which are probably, I don't know the word in English, reprises, des reprises, which were maybe done by people who were learning the basic gesture for napping. And we have also a single very small core, which presents all the geometric characteristics of naviform shape, abaficial shaping, the starting of two platforms, and the beginning of two small crates. And it's 5 centimeters long. And probably this is a try made by a young person. We have exactly, if I remember well, it seems that François Briouat published exactly the same situation in Schuler-Rocombos, where I found the normal classical shapes of cores, and also a miniature one that is also interpreted as a try made by a young person. So probably the context of apprenticeship is part of the job, you know. It's part. Apprenticeship is part of it, and curiously, surprisingly, you can recognize the virtual scheme, the ideal scheme of the naviform patterns in the small cores. This is very impressive. So I think the question of apprenticeship is part of the system. I'm not sure to have given you a good reply, but
no, I think it's a very good reply, and you know, the whole aspect of in some ways compared to technologies for later periods, metallurgy, for example, there is a matter that our cousins that we work with, the prehistoric people and doing flint knapping, that's often viewed as being somehow less complicated as a technology than metallurgy. And yet, you know, your work, amongst other work, lays out the complicated sequence, the control, the regularity, the standardization, which has to somehow be connected to apprenticeships and somehow has to be connected to people. And I don't think there's any question, but then that sort of begs the question of why are we not seeing that same level in some other places? You know, why are we not, you know, the whole question of, well, why does it get to a world where you have this high degree of standardization and learning in particular places, Kaletepe, but not necessarily other places? So
I think we have to wait, because I'm not sure, but I think that somehow Belgium has a plan to start something in Kayola workshop. And in this Kayola workshop, if I remember well, there's also a very high-level production of naviform and unidirectional cores. So, but probably that's what I suggested in my talk. There is a delay between the very early exploitation in Kaletepe and secondary exploitation in the Kayola district. But this is, I think, this is the first time that when we excavated Kaletepe, nobody has ever done this job before. So I think it's an open question. I'm sure that if you visit Kayola, you will be surprised that in many cases there are huge amount of wastes which are probably of the very early period. So I think there is a real tropism of part of the Neolithic community towards this material, toward the obsidian, and for symbolic reason, and for considering that this material have a symbolic value and are associated to a personal prestige and elite and emergence of elite. So probably I think this has to be studied much more in detail.
Okay, thank you. Heval. Microphone.
Thank you very much, Didier, for your presentation. I would like to ask a question about social interaction with the Central Anatolian. By the way, the Azan started. I'm so sorry. Yeah, we had this problem before. Anyway, I hope you can hear me. So I would like to ask a question about the social interaction between the Epipaleolithic, the Central Anatolian Epipaleolithic groups and the Near Eastern, let's say, the Euphrates and Tigris area. And how was the interaction? Was it peaceful, can we say, or was there any trouble between them? And the second question connecting with this, how was the system running? I know it's a very, we need time to answer this, but your opinion, when you look at through the obsidian, how do you see the system was running? Who were the people part of this trade? Thank you very much. I hope.
I'm not sure to be able to give you a satisfactory answer, but concerning the context, was it peaceful or not? We have, of course, we have no idea. We have no evidence for discussing this question. I'm not sure that in the early phases in Ashekle or Banjaklu or there are traces of any traces of violence. So I don't think so. Maybe Doug is able to reply or Meribam, but I don't think so. So we don't know where to look at for replaying this question. Concerning how does it work? This Jan asks a parallel question. How does it work? I don't know. We don't know how it works. We are just able to say that both systems are really contemporary. They coexist in a very small region. So these two community of practices hunter-gatherers versus Neolithic, they shared probably the same resource, but when, how, nobody knows. The only thing we can suggest is that the Neolithic signal, the technical Neolithic signal, which is specific of Neolithic, at one moment informed the epipaleolithic system. This is the reason why we have in Ashekle we have this mixing of Neolithic characters, but poorly mastered, and the persistence of an epipaleolithic tradition, mainly in the very important use of retouch of back retouch of abrupt retouch, for instance, the microlates, microburn, and so on. This is all we are unfortunately obliged to stick to the data. It's very difficult to make a model of interaction.
Okay, thank you, Didier. Bogdana, she has two questions.
Yeah, I'll start with one. Thank you very much for the exciting talk. I was wondering something about the new dates from Kaletepe itself, because I remember from your previous publication that you were talking about this very short occupation between 8,300 and 8,200, but based on the indirect connections and indirect evidence, you were suggesting that it was possible that already early activity of the workshop was fitting into the early PPNB.
Yeah.
So now when you have these really exciting new dates, it's actually showing that they were not there just for the short time, but for quite some time. So is this giving any new hints about, okay, maybe it's too exaggerating question, but about the origins of the people? Because previously it was a little bit about them coming from these, but is this now changing or is just supporting this assumption?
Thank you for this question, Bogdana. Indeed, when you look at the range of the chronological range, thanks to the new dates in Kaletepe, it's rather long. And I have always in mind the question of these two different blade production system. I mean, the naviform on one hand, and the pressure production on the other. When you look at this problem from outside, you can know that naviform is very deeply anchored in the early transition, maybe transitional levels in Jerf and so on, and Jade. And on the other hand, prismatic production are perceived as a component, as importations more generally in the early PPNB phase. Maybe there's a slight difference when you look at the presence of the prismatic bladelets in the south, and not in the earliest phase of the PPNB or PPNB transition. So the question feedback to Kaletepe is, are these two productions really associated? Or is the association the result of a kind of palimpsest, resulting of the fact that there are open spaces, there are wastes. And this waste, we are at 1,000 meters high, with a very poor development of soils. That's probably. Mm-hmm. And maybe this is what I would like to understand better. Is it possible to split this assemblage into different and successive events? This is one, in my opinion, and for me, one of the really exciting question opened by this new dates.
Yeah, they're really exciting. Yeah, and if I may ask a second little question. So at the end of your presentation, it's a little bit out of Central Anatolian focus, but I've seen that you kind of dotted the presence of pressure blade making in Iran. I think I've seen it from the side of Asia. And I was wondering, what is the reason for it? Do you think that the local producers are not securely there, or they were rather disconnected from the entire sphere of exchange?
I think this is only due to my lack of knowledge about this context.
Okay.
That's it.
Thank you very much.
Hala? Your microphone.
Hi, Didier.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I was waiting so much for this conference. And I have a question. It's similar than the one that Ian just asked you, but I will say it in a different way. So if you have identified zones in the workshop with ratios, high ratios of accidents, napping accidents, and if you can relate this to the ratio or to the percentage of occurrence of obsidians, yeah, you understand my question?
Ala, we have to check, but after the preliminary survey of this of the repartition the different types of blanks in the waste area, we didn't find any concentration of nothing. Everything is everywhere.
Okay.
There's, it is, the problem is linked to the fact that it is a waste, a rejection area, and probably, it's very difficult to find consistent. When we look at the refittings, there's not so much, but there are, and they're crossing here and there everywhere. So it's for instance. So we cannot identify the functioning of this big area. There's no, for the moment, we have to check several points, and particularly the altitude of the different cores, depending on the method of mapping, which has not been still done. But in my opinion, there is no obvious organization of this area.
Mm-hmm.
And the epsilon blades are everywhere.
Okay. Actually, the question was more if you can relate the learning patterns that you have distinguished with probably the occurrence of more or less epsilon.
The epsilon, I don't really understand why you asked this, because epsilon is not the reparation of an accident. No? It's normal. It's something you have to do for maintaining the adequate convexity of longitudinal convexity of the core. And you have the equivalent of the epsilon, which is a basal reduction. And this is, you have to make this technical. They are not related in any case to accident or something. They belong absolutely to the original scheme of flaking.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Any question? Okay, please, Ian.
Hi. Didier. Oh, sorry, Juan, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. Hi, Didier. Thank you for your conference. Very nice. My main question is about the consumers of this production, because normally I suppose these people was producing these bipolar blades for the south, yeah, for where this production could be appreciated. But in the sides, the production of this quality is very scarce, and there are very few so long and perfect blades. So it seems that it was this production was not for a specific place, maybe was for several different places, and maybe how do you imagine this, the people that was consuming this production and was interested, or maybe was able to get access to this production?
I think that this kind of production is has to be considered in many cases prestige production. And I have in mind the special case of Kömürcü-Kaletepe. There is in the channel phase a huge, incredibly long and perfect and rectilinear big point coming from naviform technology. And this is in the skull building, China. So if we are not able to find so much of this type, that probably means that they are devoted to special activity in the hands of a few persons. That's it, I think. but I have not any evidence of it, except maybe in this case of a Chinese skull building.
Ian, first, may I ask something related with that question before you? Thank you. Didier, what did why Ashiklu people never interested with naviform? Is it a behavioral reason or a kind of ethnic rejection, or I mean something like Kaletepe people, strangers for Ashiklu people, they use same sources?
Well, maybe there are two parts in my reply. First, the first point is I think that when Ashiklu started, but Meriban maybe has new dates for level 5, but I think when Ashiklu started, Kaletepe was not anymore operational. So that's one point. So the question is, what happened and when did the other naviform production of the Goledag system where are they, and but when was it operating? I think especially in Bertlekeller and Ekenlik. We know that the pressure bladelets from the Goledag are spreading to the south in the late phase of PPN. Not very late, but at least at the end of the ninth millennium, at the very end of the ninth millennium. And at that time, Ashiklu was functioning. So this suggests that there is a kind of mental, not physical, but a mental barrier between these two parts of these two populations, maybe of these two groups, and maybe probably there are no connections. This is the main problem. There are no connections. So both systems are excluded. The only connection you can imagine is the influence of, because in a broad sense, the naviform Kaletepe production can be more or less similar, but to bidirectional debitage in Ashiklu. But it's a kind of imitation and not obviously direct interaction. So I don't know. This is a mystery.
Yeah.
Maybe you will find close to Shekel-Basha new sites dating from the very early phase, and everything will be solved at that moment. Ganesh.
We don't have there too.
We know nothing about this period when the workshop is functioning. We have almost no data all around.
All right.
Because even in Penarbasha, there is not a real gap, but there is something which looks like a small little gap between the two modes of distribution of probabilities.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe there is a room there for something. But we have no data, so we cannot discuss more.
I think Miriban has some additional knowledge.
Ian, do you want me? Do you mind if I just say something?
You go first. I defer to you, of course.
Thank you. Didier, thank you so much for the talk. First of all, what I like to say about Kaletepe workshop is that it's just one workshop that you have excavated, isn't it?
Yeah.
But we know that the sources function since 40,000, 35,000 years ago. Is it right? Because of the connections or the chemical analysis show that they function, they were functioning since 35,000, right? Is it You agree. So now the present dates of Kaletepe may predate Aşıklı. That's okay. But first of all, we don't, the earliest levels of Aşıklı are not yet fully dated. But we have single dates going back to 9,000 calibrated BC, okay. But just single dates. So it still needs to be reworked and restudied and reinterpreted. So I don't want to say too much things about it. But what we know is that at one point, Kaletepe, I mean the sources, let's say, sources and the possible workshops had some parallel, or they were contemporary with Aşıklı at some point, right? I mean, not your area, maybe, but they were contemporary. So what Güney says is right. Aşıklı never and ever, I mean the community of Aşıklı never and ever got interested in naviform technology, in high level production of obsidian, never. Yeah. But there is just one example which I would love to show it next week during our talk, and I hope you will join and see it. It's Nurcan and Çiler found one core. That core looks like Kaletepe imitation, but it's just imitation, as if the nappers of Aşıklı were in Kaletepe. They have met the experts there, have seen the technology, copied it, but just copied one, right? And they never adopted that technology. So there is a big question mark on why those two communities, why those two groups never interacted or never adopted their, not of course Kaletepe nappers, but Aşıklı nappers never and ever adopted that technology. That's quite interesting. But it's not just that obsidian technology. We will talk about it, but Aşıklı was quite, the community was quite, how to say, isolated from around. That's another story, it seems. So.
Just for adding just a comment, I want to insist on the fact that the expertise in Kaletepe is very, very, very high. So that means that it is constantly improved in the context of specialists and entertained, I don't know if it's correct, in this context, you know. And it's very difficult for, I guess, for a napper, even if he or she is a good napper, to acquire the skills which are necessary for replicating this technology. So that means also that both groups belong to different socio-cultural contexts. And when we look at the southeast and the Levant, we can see that this highly developed technology is shared with in several settlements. It is not an isolated thing, but there is a general context of a high level technology for flint napping. So, in my opinion, it underlines what you are just saying is underlying the huge difference between the two groups. And this is also, it goes in my sense, I think that maybe this Neolithic from Ashekler, this first farmers from Ashekler and elders after, they just acquire those knowledge by imitation or impression, you know, and thanks to the coexistence for maybe for long duration between the two entities.
Mm-hmm.
That's difficult. We need to know more about the early Ashekler and maybe other settlements which can occupy the very same range, the same chronological range. It would be very, very important, of course.
Okay, finally, please.
Didier, one of the things that I'm wondering about, and this sort of follows on from what Doug was saying, is the sense of what tools are they using to make the tools? You know, in the way of when you did the excavations at Kaletepe 3, in the way of, what did you find in the way of hammer stones, limestone hammer stones, antler billets, antler tines, smaller pieces of sandstone for abraders, chunks of limestone, first aid kits, band-aids, used band-aids, things used in making the tools. Did you find anything that helped understand that at all?
We have very few traces of, we have very few knapping tools. Very few. There are some hammer stones, soft hammer stones, but very difficult to relate to the practice of knapping. And also we have to keep in mind that we are in a sedimentologic context, which does not preserve any organic material. It's also an answer for Doug. If they had brought some animal there, of course the conditions, taxonomic condition, cannot preserve them. And if there were knapping tools, sticks, and bone tools that were obviously used for knapping, they're missed because anyway they cannot be preserved by the sedimentary context. So this is a very difficult context.
Yeah, thanks.
It's a miracle that we could collect few charcoal, and it's a miracle. And we passed a long time for finding these micro charcoals because we were obsessed. So, but there are very, very few.
Okay. Any question? Final comments?
Just a comment about what just Didier said, that maybe also the tools are never left on the site. The knappers will never left their tools.
You are true, Allah.
So,
thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Trevor, please.
Didier, I'm fascinated by your talk, and I'm wondering about the difference between the two groups on your map of the producers and the consumers. Yeah, the people who in the northern sites, they are consuming the very high quality production. Yeah, and then further south, ones in blue on your distribution map, they don't have quite the same high quality material, and they don't appreciate it in the same way. But what I'm interested in is once these very, very fine, expertly produced pieces get from Central Anatolia to the sites in the north of that zone, the red area on your map, they are then reshaped. They're then finally shaped into something else. Yeah, am I right, or are they just prized as beautiful blades?
I'm not sure to catch your question. You asked me if some productions from the Cappadocia moved towards the northeast.
Yeah, the sites like China, for example. Yeah,
I don't think there are any evidence of this. My arrow, if you make reference to the black arrows, the black arrow means for me that there are technical traditions which are shared, but no evidence of a transfer, of concrete transfer, which, on the other hand, is observed from the north to the south. So from the west to the east, there's the analogies are only based on the procedures of making blades, and this is a virtual ideal link, and not a concrete transfer of goods.
So in that case, where was the product from the Kaletepe workshop going?
Where
who was obtaining the product from the Kaletepe workshop?
If you speak about the prismatic blades, it's well known. We have a lot in Cyprus. We have a lot everywhere in the Levant for the prismatic blade production. For the naviform, the only evidence of the distribution of Kaletepe workshop is towards Mureybet. There's one piece in Jade, and maybe one piece in Gder, which has been compared by Frédéric Abès, Marie-Claire Covin, to the Kaletepe workshop production. But this is, I'm not sure to be, maybe I'm not clear.
No, you stressed in your talk how expert the flint knappers who were working at Kaletepe, I took from that this would be a very high prestige product to own, in the same way that there are very high prestige motor cars compared to the average Toyota that I own, in our world, and I'm wondering, where did these high prestige pieces go? Okay, here comes the second part of it. There are plenty of other examples of material from Golidag, at that period and before and after, which are very widely distributed. But these prestige pieces, presumably have a very special market. They go to somewhere. They go to places where they're particularly appreciated. I own one of those very high quality pieces from the best Kaletepe workshop, not one of the inferior workshops, but from the very best,
Yes, this is the same remarks than Ronho did just before, and in my opinion, this production is dedicated to symbolic activities. I've given the example of naviform production in channel building in China, which are linked to funerary practices or commemorative practices, and I think for Kaletepe naviform production, this is the same.
But, so I think it reflects back to what the first point that Ian made some time ago, where he was saying about metal production being commonly thought to be very, very specialized and highly prized. But what you're telling us is that, yes, but there are also equivalent, highly qualified, highly specialized, highly expert, highly people producing highly prestige products. And I think that adds another dimension to what we think of as the egalitarian Neolithic, that here there are complexities in production and distribution, which we had not suspected at all, and are much more sophisticated than we have been inclined to think of this primitive Neolithic period.
But in my opinion, this kind of networking, this kind of repartition of skills, this is an enhancement of the complex societies, clearly. But Gordon Childe said so. Gordon Childe in 1925 already said so.
He said many things which have been forgotten. And he didn't say many things that people said he said.
I would just add, Didier, and what you're saying, Trevor, not only the prestige of these items, but the fact that clearly people would have recognized, just as you said, Trevor, this is something that is from such and such a place. This is of the regularity, the shape that was recognized. Yeah, I think we have to talk about these as not only symbolic items, but as gifts and potentially used in that kind of way that one, I don't know, maybe these are the wedding knives that are given as gifts in those moments, you know. But yes, it would have to be something on that level at some point, right?
No, so I agree totally what you said.
Okay.
If I can add something more, I don't think.
Any question? Okay, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Didier. We are waiting you to Central Anatolia.
Thank you, Ganesh. Thank you, Maribon. Hope to see you soon in Central Anatolia.